Hello, good morning. So I have a question for you all. Part of what I was told is the hopes for this class is that it would help you prepare more for licensure. So I was just kind of curious if you were to think on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 was the most ready, the most prepared you could possibly be for licensure, you would absolutely just smash it and pass it without any concerns. And 1 was that you are completely unprepared and you would fail miserably the licensure exam. Where would you say you are today? Give me a number. Give me a number. What number would you say you are at? Okay, okay. So if you said around a 7, um, what would it have to happen for you to feel like maybe you were actually getting a little less prepared, like going from a 7 to a 6.5? Okay, and then how about the other direction? What would be something not all the way up to a 10, of course, but just the smallest kind of concrete thing that would help you go from a 7 to a 7.5? Oh, okay. So that's pretty. So if you did those things, you would feel like you're at least moving in that direction. Now, consider that tonight you go to sleep and you don't know exactly why, but during the night a miracle happens, and in the morning you are absolutely prepared for the licensure exam. What would be the first thing that you would notice that would let you know that a miracle had happened, that something had changed? Oh, okay, awesome. Today we're going to talk about solution-focused brief therapy, and it's for me one of the most practical models that exists out there. The techniques are really concrete and they're really helpful in helping sort of um, identify where people want to go and to figure out how they what they need to know in order to know that they're moving in that direction. I ask versions of solution focused therapy questions in almost every one of my sessions. I adapt them, but the origin comes from this model. So, solution focused brief therapy was developed at the Brief Family Therapy Center in Milwaukee in the late 70s and 80s. The founders were Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg, just amazing humans and really great therapists. Um, Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg, those are names that you would want to know for the exam. They also thought of themselves as a research team. They found that the module number of sessions was 1, which fits nicely for those of you who are interested in single session therapy. They were really informed. They went and got training at the MRI, and so of course there's a lot of commonalities with the MRI, but they did come up with some real unique differences, and you should figure out the differences. Some of those differences are the unique intervention strategies that they used. One of the things is that we don't have to create change. Change is happening all the time, and our job is sort of to identify it and amplify the changes that are happening that are useful in people's lives. So, solution focused brief therapy is a short term, goal focused therapeutic approach that helps clients change by constructing solutions rather than dwelling on problems. It explores current resources rather than present problems. It explores hope rather than past causes. And people often it's the idea that people are resourceful, that they have within them the ability to change things and to address the problem that they're facing. Part of the goal is to figure out what is working and to do more of that. There's always exceptions. There's nothing is always or never. So other ways we could talk about that is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's very different actually than therapists who go in looking to figure out what's not working. It's different than having an agenda like people need to be a certain form or need to be doing things a certain way. There's a multiplicities of ways to live our lives. Once you know what's working, you want to do more of it. And then it's also, you could think about that as transferable. I was doing this week with some clients. They're doing absolutely great in one area of their lives. And so we're trying to look at the strengths in those and see if those might be applied to the area that they're struggling with. And if it doesn't work, do something different. Don't this is where I thought there were some similarities with the MRI and their focus on attempted solutions. It's like you're if something is not functioning, one of the biggest things you can do to bring about change is to stop doing that. Um, it acknowledges distress. Like as I'm talking about that, it doesn't mean that it's not the person who's doing the therapy is not compassionate. You can acknowledge the difficulty in people's lives, but it does shift towards successes faster than some models might. There's links to these ideas in positive psychology. Uh, this when I ask people to tell me about their problems, for example, they can absolutely rattle off all the different difficulties they're having or problems they're having or limitations they see within themselves. If I ask them to talk about their strengths, it's actually hard for people, and I think that means that maybe they haven't considered that route as much. So it's solution talk, not problem talk. And I know that can be hard because I think a lot of therapies actually really are problem focused, rather than solution focused. And it is a little bit of art. Like, how do we move people telling you about their problems to talking about their success? But it can be actually really empowering. So there's lots of different techniques from this approach, but the two you should absolutely know about are the miracle question and scaling questions. The miracle question is basically that you ask them if a miracle were to happen during the course of a night, what would be some of the things that they would notice the next day? Here's one way of saying it. Suppose tonight, while you slept, a miracle occurred. When you awake tomorrow, what would be some of the things that you would notice that would tell you that life had suddenly gotten better? Um, and then you could also ask, like, who else might notice that, or who might be the most surprised by that? Like, you can ask some relational questions using the miracle question as well. The scaling question, this is really so adaptable, and so you can use it in so many different ways. So the basic is, okay, so for example, if I'm working with someone who's really having high levels of anxiety, maybe I would say something like, if 10 is the most unbearable agony possible and 1 is the most blissful peace, what would you say that uh, where would you put yourself on that scale right now? So if they say a 7, it doesn't really matter what number they say, because then I often will ask, well, what things would let them start to feel like things were getting worse, and then I go the other direction, and whatever they say, I usually say, well, now that's a 10. What would be something smaller that would let you know you're on the way towards that? Because you want to get them down to the most very concrete example of things that would let them know that things are improving. Another way of saying it, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is that you achieve completely your goal and 1 is the furthest away you could have ever been, where would you place yourself right now? On a scale of 1 to 10, where is 1, where 1 is the worst that things have been and 10 is the best where things have been, where would you place yourself today? You could also use scaling questions kind of relationally. Like, you might say, if I were to ask your partner where would they say you are between 1 and 10 on achieving your goal? What makes them more confident or less confident? Why do they think you have gone further? What would it take to convince them that you're moving towards your goal? Another way you could do it is focusing on motivation. On the scale of between 1 and 10, how willing are you to work on solving this problem? Who is most motivated to solve this problem? Where would you put their motivation on the same scale? What do you think makes them more or less motivated? So if we think about addressing your eating disorder, if we were to think about it like a trip that we're going on, and it's 100 miles away, what would be something that would let you know that you have gone the first mile, so that you know that you're at least moving in the direction of addressing that challenge? How would you know if you're halfway there? And then what would be some of the road signs you might see as you're arriving at your destination? Imagine that you're coming from a very spiritual background, and you said you've been praying that God will answer this prayer. Now, think if tonight a miracle happens and God grants your desires, what would be the first thing when you wake up in the morning that will let you know that he has granted that desire. Anyways, you get the idea. So some other basic assumptions. The therapist's job is to identify and amplify change. So like if you notice something that they're doing well, you really pay attention to that. Like they might just give you a stream of negative things that have happened, but they mention one positive. Go, no, wait a second. So this week you were able to go over 24 hours without the two of you having an argument. What was going on that day? How did that happen? And then really focusing on that. It is usually unnecessary to know a lot about the complaint in order to resolve it. Like some models will say that you need to really spend the first number of sessions doing assessments and figuring out all the very important details about that. This model didn't believe that. It's actually, from this perspective, not necessary to know the cause or the function of a complaint to resolve it, which is why this would be a briefer model, because you could spend 7 years figuring out the whys of something before you even start working on solutions. So this tries to avoid that pitfall. Another assumption is that small change is all that is really necessary. And that a change in one part of the system can affect another. Like sometimes people think you have to do a 360-degree turn, but if you actually just make one small little movement to in a different direction, you're going to end up in a different destination. So it's sort of that idea. And sometimes you're not able to work with all members of the family. So this model holds the belief that if you're able to affect change in one member of the family, it's probably going to affect the others within the systems. This model believes that it's the clients that define the goals, and that you work on them and you work on helping them to get to a concrete one, but it's not therapist driven. It's not their agenda that matters so much as the clients does. It's the idea that there's no right way to view things and that different views might be valid. This is where, if I haven't already promoted it, you should go watch the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. One of the best talks I've ever heard. But it's this idea that there are so many different ways to live and so many different ways to do things. So if it's working, then it's okay. And if it's not working, then you help them come up with different options. It's focusing on what is possible and changeable rather than spending so much focus on what's impossible and intractable, unchangeable. So if we were to think about sort of a way to approach client goals, from this model, they are multiple and varied. You describe the presence rather than the absence. So it's the addition rather than subtraction. So if someone says, I want to get rid of my depression, then you would focus on, okay, so when your depression is gone, what are some of the things that you will be doing that you're not currently doing? Okay, and then how will you approach difficulties in your life differently when depression's no longer a determining factor? And then what would be the smallest kind of concrete thing that would let you know that's happening? This model is also very interactional. It's observable. It's not something that you're looking intrapsychically. In other words, the goals need to be realistic and achievable. So if someone says that they want to be happy forever and never fight, then that might not be as reasonable as that they'll have an increase in the joy that they experience in life, and that their arguments will be more productive. And it does require thought and effort. People need to be doing something in order to bring about those changes. Okay, some other interviewing ideas is looking for past successes. So if someone's talking about difficulties in raising their children, maybe you would talk about, well, what's the thing that you're most proud about as a parent? Wow, and then how did that happen? Oh, that is a great success. Now, what do you think you were doing differently in that time that maybe has been forgotten, that could be reclaimed? You might say something about pre-session change, which is often something that happens when people just call to make an appointment. Things often start to improve. I think it's because now there's an intentionality around it. So I might say, so I'm curious if anything has changed since you called to schedule the appointment. Okay, and then why do you think those things did change? And then just other ways to say this is it's exceptions. Whenever something that they're talking about, a presenting problem, wasn't in existence, or was gone for a day, or was improved, I want to know a lot about those. And I think about those as a gold mine that I'm going to mine for a good part of the session. So if you were to think about kind of typical stages in a solution focused pre-therapy approach. There'd be the social stage, a greeting, welcome to therapy. You'd ask them a little bit about the problem. And then you might ask the miracle question. You might ask about exceptions or pre session changes. Use the scale to evaluate a number of different factors. Just a side thing on this, I remember I worked at the YWCA in Louisiana, and we would ask a scaling question at the end of every session, and then sort of track it. And then we were able to show people afterwards that they were progressing. You might ask them if there was anything else that they wanted to say, and then this model did start by working with teams. So if that's an option, you would take a break, and then you'd come back and give them a message and or a homework assignment. No, that's the basic model.